from the Socialist Party to the Communist Party. There's no question that that's the case.
But you say that the Jewish world has been sanitized to a great extent. Sanitized.
Well, I think now that that you've had the fall of the Soviet Union, and you've had the fact that the Soviet Union has acknowledged all these enormous crimes. That, you know, Stalin killed 20 million people by 1940. The police state nature, and you know, that whole thing. Well, if you want to say that Jews were an essential part of it, which I think they were. I mean, my view is that without Jews, you would not have had the success of the Bolshevik Revolution, would not have taken the direction it did. I think that's a reasonable point of view.
What about the 60s in this country, which you describe as a watershed, a cultural watershed in our country? Was there a pivotal, a vital Jewish element in what happened in the 60s?
Absolutely, because Jews were still the main force on the left. And if you look at the Jews, at the people who were into top positions of the campus movements, I was at the University of Wisconsin, there's no question. They were the children of the 1930s radicals. And there was, you know, the so-called red diaper babies. And, you know, in collusion, again, besides the fact that if you look at these Jewish intellectual movements, you do see Jewish identity and Jewish interest. But the other thing is that these movements have always had access to the very top levels of the media, the very top levels of the academic world. So when the 60s radicals were you know, saying and doing what they were doing, there was also a huge amount being written by radicals in the very best periodicals. You know, there were very respectable, academic respectable. Look at, by that time, if you look at the very top universities, Harvard, Berkeley, all these Ivy League universities, University of Wisconsin, you had major Jewish involvement in the social sciences. And so that sort of greased the whole thing and made it much more legitimate.
We're going to move there in a moment. I just want to ask you some final questions about the civil rights struggle in particular here. For instance, the Southern Poverty Law Center is very conspicuous today as far as combating racism. Is there a Jewish angle to the work that they do?
Well, there is. I don't know exactly, you know, what the involvement is, but it receives a lot of its funding from Jewish sources. Many of the people that work there are Jews. It's almost like a semi-official Jewish organization. It's not like the ADL, which is, you know, overtly Jewish, but it is very much concerned to, you know, combat anti-Semitism. So it's one of the main.
So was there anti-racism efforts focused on basically white racism, I presume?
Oh, absolutely. There's no
Jewish racism, or black racism.
I've seen some people who've tried to change their focus because whites are increasingly the victims of ethnic violence in this country, and I think they will be increasing in the future as we see these demographic changes. The whites are going to be victimized at least as much as anybody else, and maybe more. But there's no interest in that kind of thing.
What about the NAACP? I know obviously that's a pro-black movement.
And yeah, it's a black movement.
What's the story behind the founding of the NAACP?
Well, yes, early in the century, around 1915 or so, you did have the NAACP was established by wealthy Jews. And if you look at the, you know, actually quite a bit of its activity involved legal, you know, challenges to various things, but almost all the lawyers until the 1930s there were no black lawyers involved in it at all.
In the NAACP?
And so all of that work for the first 20 years or so was done by Jewish lawyers. And you started to have some blacks, and finally around 1940s, I recall, I'm not sure that you had a black head of it, but you still had very major Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement. You know, most of the civil rights laws were actually written in Jewish civil rights organizations and pushed through Congress and funded and so on. Blacks were not well organized and well funded.
Sure.
They were poorly educated. Jews were just the opposite.
And Jewish liberals will tell you today they're very proud of their work.
They're very proud of it.
They did it for one reason. That was to increase the advancement and give more opportunities to African Americans. What do you say to that? Well,
but also I think their official ideology was that if you end discrimination against blacks, you're also going to end discrimination against Jews. That was part of the official.
So that was part of that was the covert agenda.
Well, it wasn't even. I think that's been acknowledged by many times. But I think the other thing about it was that they saw these movements as a sort of you know, as if no one would lose. You know, and I think the other aspect of these movements is that they have tended to lessen the power of white majority in this country. No
And you think that was definitely
especially
part
in
of
conjunction with immigration. But certainly the civil rights movement, a lot of that, I think very few people could disagree with. But at the same time, when that was combined with immigration changes, I think you're seeing a gradual lessening of the power of European-derived peoples in the United States. And I think that is another one of the agenda. If you look at when it comes to immigration, there's no question, because the Jewish activists have expressed themselves on this. They're not, again, they haven't been shy to make that point.
Right, we're going to get to that in a moment, too. Yeah. But I do want to ask you, now here's another thing that we both agree that there's been a jump from a lot of the Jewish community from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, because you think it serves the state of Israel as being very well served by the Republicans. But here's a quote that I took out of your book, and the neocons are in charge of that process within the conservative ranks. You say that self-deception and rationalization are central elements of Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy.
Well, yeah, it comes up at times, and other times it's not. I mean, I don't say that Jews are always self-deceived or always rationalizing, but I have a chapter in my book, Separation, and it just contains the one on anti-Semitism. Just going over historically, looking at all the apologia, all the rationalizations. I mean, because Jews, as a minority group, they've had to deal with Christian ideology. Certainly within Christian theology, Jews had a certain subservient role to play. Well, you have to get around that. You have to have rationalize your particular theology. So it's been a part of Jewish thinking forever. If you look at over history, look in the Talmud, you look in Jewish writings, they've been concerned to justify themselves, to sort of make sense of their position in the world. And a lot of times, from today's standpoint, it's pretty easy to see it's rationalization. It doesn't make any sense, but it serves its purpose to rally the troops. But you still see it today. You still see some of that. I don't know that that's centrally involved in neoconservatism. I think that neoconservatives have been fairly upfront about the fact that Israel is a very high position in their
going to
agenda.
war, banging the drum, stop terrorism. So
we see that. That is for public consumption. I think that there is a lot. I mean, and there's a sort of official. Quite a few people, including myself, think that the philosopher Leo Strauss. That was one of his, his principles, that it was okay to tell lies for a good cause, and so we see propaganda and so on. But I think that the main Jews behind these things have not been self-deceived. I think they've known what this is about. It's possible, who knows? It's hard to decide between deception and self-deception sometimes. But whatever it is, Paul Wolfowitz, for example. He may talk about terrorism and this and that, but it's easy to find a paper trail of his deep commitment, socially, personally, intellectually, his close relationships with Israeli generals and political figures and all that. If he says he's not interested in Israel, then he's really, that's his.
But how do you explain the complicity of America's, non-Jewish political establishment, leadership, whatever, from the president down, with their going along with this campaign of at least partial deception?
It's an amazing thing that's going on here. Certainly when you had 9/11, it opened the door. It allowed people to do things that they didn't before. And people said that, like Paul Wolfowitz said, without that, they wouldn't have been able to do this. But you've had, and I think you have to look at some certain non-Jews, in this case, Dick Cheney. I mean, he's critically important to the success of the neocon thing. Without him, I don't think it would happen. And he was involved in staffing the Pentagon, say. So the reason you got not only Rumsfeld, who also is not Jewish, but you got Wolfowitz, Pearl, Feith, all these other guys. Well, Pearl's not, but the point is that these were the guys who staffed the lower levels and produced this war mentality. like many people, I don't think George Bush is really, in charge of his own administration.